Hey guys, it's Carrie, and welcome to my channel. Thanks for tuning in. This is my first real video where I'm actually going to talk about a book, and I wanted to talk about JFK, so I was trying to think of the most recent book I read that had anything to do with JFK. And it's actually not a nonfiction book. It's not a major, academic tome or conspiracy theory book or anything like that. It is John Green's Looking for Alaska. And I know I'm late to this party. A little late reading this one. But if you haven't read this book before, this review will be spoiler free. And I hope it will be entertaining for you. It will be a little different than most of the reviews on YouTube here, because I'll tell you why I liked the book, but then I'll also go into how this is similar to JFK and what it has in common with Kennedy and his assassination. So let's get into it. This book is a coming of age novel, and I will say it is extremely well written. It is broken down into two sections. So there is a before section and an after section. The before section is a countdown. It's, 180 days before, 179 days before, 178 days before. So you know that something is coming, something major is coming. And so there is a bit of anticipation there, which I liked. Our main character, Miles Halter, he is a skinny kid who doesn't quite fit in, and he chooses to go to a boarding school that his dad went to. And he's doing this to seek his great perhaps. And so that's what he does. He goes and he ends up meeting a great group of friends. One unique thing about Miles is that he is obsessed with famous last words, which is actually what I have marked in the book here. So that immediately hooked me in this book, because as a history nerd, I was thrilled to come across these really cool little factoids, because these famous last words were funny. Some of them were kind of mysterious. Some of them were kind of eerie when you really thought about them being someone's last words. So I really liked that aspect of the book. But Miles ends up meeting this girl named Alaska, and Alaska is an avid reader. She has what she calls her life's library in her room. So she has a ton of books, and that's something that they bond over. They also bond over pranks. They pull a lot of very elaborate pranks at this boarding school, which was pretty fun to read about. And there's also a cool professor character that I liked in this book. So I liked the fact that you had some adult characters that were pretty neat as well. And I liked this book better than Paper Towns, because I felt like the teenage dialogue was more realistic. In some of the John Green novels, some of the dialogue, I'm around teenagers a lot, and some of the dialogue I just felt was unbelievable. But this book I liked, I enjoyed, and I found extremely believable as far as how the characters interacted with each other. So that's why I liked the book. I'm gonna leave it at that, because I don't want to spoil anything for you if you haven't read this book. Let's get into the Kennedy connections. So the first Kennedy connection is the setup at this boarding school. So John F. Kennedy went to Choate Boarding School in Connecticut, and he also was known as a prankster. He had a little core group of friends, just like Miles, and they called themselves the Muckers, and they were known for pulling pranks, which is kind of a neat little part of Kennedy's background. And at the time, he was considered a mediocre student, which, of course, based on his later phenomenal political success, You know, a lot of people would be surprised to know that. Something else that's a Kennedy connection here, with Alaska, her character, she has this reading obsession. Kennedy was also an avid reader. He was actually a speed reader. He could read 1,200 words a minute. And he wasn't obsessed with famous last words, but most of the things that Kennedy read were biographies. So he probably would have been an amazing booktuber because he would have read at lightning speed, and he had amazing charisma. So he would have been great on camera. We knew he looked great on camera because he was pretty much the first camera-ready president. Ask Nixon about that. But so that was kind of a cool Kennedy connection. And then the most obvious Kennedy connection is the Kennedy quote that's in this book. And it's Kennedy's last quote. So, of course, Miles is obsessed with famous last words. So he quotes Kennedy's last words as being, "That's obvious." This was an exciting moment for me, right? Because any mention of Kennedy, and I'm like, yay, mention of Kennedy, I'm excited. But this really just threw me for a loop, because this is the only place I have ever seen this quote. I have seen Kennedy's last words. I have seen Kennedy's last words in many places. I have never seen these as being Kennedy's last words. I have always seen Kennedy's last words as being, "No, you certainly can't." And that's coming from Nellie Connolly. So the governor of Texas, Governor John Connolly, he and his wife were sitting in front of President Kennedy in the limousine, and as they're driving in the motorcade, they're noticing the crowd, the Dallas crowd, and Nellie Connolly turns and says, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." And President Kennedy replies, "No, you certainly can't." And then that's when he gets shot in the throat. And I've seen that quoted in many different places, again and again and again. So I've seen Kennedy's last words quoted many times, and I have never, ever, ever seen this quote. That's obvious, and never seen that. And so after I read this, I looked it up, and the only place I could find it quoted were on websites that quoted this book. So I don't know where that's coming from, but I am going to take up for John Green a little bit here, because in the description box, I am going to link 2 different articles that will talk about Kennedy's last words. And in one of the articles, it references Nellie Connolly's interaction there with Kennedy. And in that exchange, instead of saying, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you," she says something different in that particular article. So there are instances where eyewitnesses, they misremember, they change their stories, so that's one thing about the Kennedy assassination. When you go back through and you start looking at files and you start looking at witness testimony, and people are looking through things with a fine-tooth comb, it becomes frustrating, and it's really difficult because you come across things like this. And I found it interesting in the back of Looking for Alaska, they were talking about different working titles for this novel, and one of the working titles that John Green talked about was Misremembering Alaska. So I thought that was kind of funny, because misremembering, a lot of people misremember what happened on November 22nd, 1963. You know, you can misremember a lot of things, and I think that definitely applies with President Kennedy for sure. And in particular when it comes to those last words, because there were even accounts later that people in the car said Kennedy exclaimed, "My God, I've been hit." And the emergency room physicians said there was no way he physically, because of the extent of the wound, there's no way physically he could have said that. So I will say this without ruining the ending to Looking for Alaska. There are a lot of unanswered questions. There's confusion. There's unanswered questions. There's independent investigations. And in that way, it's just like the Kennedy assassination. Because I don't think we'll ever really know all of the answers to our questions. And sometimes that's really frustrating. But I think that it's important to keep reading and keep studying about important people and the things they did that were important. And I think that if you're interested, President Kennedy is one of those key people who was in office at a really interesting point in our history. And that's one of the reasons I think he's so interesting. So I will link a few websites in the description box. If you're interested, check them out. I don't know what the next book I read I'm going to read will be. I don't know if it will be a Kennedy book, but maybe. We'll see. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.